Joint Committee. Today we have an interesting agenda ahead of us, and we're just going to work through some issues around quorum to start with, and whether we can make decisions or whether we flick this into a workshop. So firstly, I'd like to say welcome to all of the public who have joined us. There's almost more of you than there is of us. So welcome. It's great to see your enthusiasm and interest in this, and we hope that you find the papers we've got for you today interesting. I'll do a call for apologies.
Zen Harding.
Zen Harding, and we've got Councillor Keith Price and Annette Brosnan are apologies as well.
Chris Dolly.
And apologies from our staff member, Chris Dolly.
And possibly apology myself, not being in the chair, I have to leave early.
Yes.
To deal with Hawkesbury Regional Council matters.
Yes. Right. So we may have Councillor Van Beek may slip out later if required.
Chair, I've just checked the quorum, so it's 6 members as long as there's one from each partner council, so we just squeak in.
We slip in, wonderful. Okay, can I have
What happens when Sheriff goes?
I think we should be pretty close to done by that stage, so we'll cross that bridge if we come to it.
For sure.
Can I have a mover and seconder for the apologies? Thank you, Councillor Redstone and Councillor Van Beek. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Do we have any notices from management?
Yep.
No notices from myself. And just a reminder that we're being live streamed. We're going to, we'll go through our agenda, and then at the completion of this at 11 o'clock, we've got some members from MFE that are going to join us. So to our community in the back, you're welcome to stay for that conversation, but we're going to end the live stream so that it's a bit more casual and we can form relationships with those key partners. Do we have any conflicts of interest today? No. And can I have a mover for the confirmation of minutes from the 11th of August?
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Van Beek, seconded by Councillor Dixon. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Right, our first paper is the current coastal projects update. I'll hand over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. We usually have a member of TAG speak to each of these updates, so could I ask somebody from Napier to speak to the Whakariri Ave, the Rangatira Ave revetment project?
Yeah, sure. You want me to come up?
Yeah, just for the live stream, if you could use the microphone.
Kia ora, I'm Heather, Senior Policy Analyst, Napier City Council. Rangatira revetment, it is about 80% complete with an expected completion date. Is it the end of October? Didn't bring anything up
During
with me.
October.
So, yeah, and an official opening in November. Questions?
Right, it's good to get traction on that one, and I'm almost there.
Can you hear that?
The Wishaw Resource Consent Renewal. Sorry, Heather, you're still in the hot seat.
I know
Is
nothing
there,
about that.
okay, is,
HBRC would be better to speak to that.
oh, yep.
Anybody from HBRC, with respect to the Wishaw? Unfortunately, Chris Dolly would normally cover that one, but he's an apology today.
There's some quite good information in the paper. Did anyone have any questions that we could take for staff for later? I'm happy to move on then.
Thank you. Home Moana 18, there's no update to give there. The Marae Tautaro River at Tiawanga. Mark, any update on that?
Yes, thank you. So as the paper says, there was some damage caused in Cyclone Gabrielle to the Marae River mouth. Excuse me. which is a bit of a cause for concern. So we've been working with the local residents there about a plan for that. There was some further damage done in a storm in April. So there was a workshop on that earlier on. In fact, there was another workshop with councillors from the Regional Council and from the District Council just a week ago, I believe, covering a number of matters out in the Cape Coast, but that certainly featured. So that's a work in progress. There is some possibility, but it's only that there might be some recovery funding for some work there. But I don't think people are waiting for that. They're progressing their plans anyway. But the other members, so Anne, you may know more about that.
And Elwyn does as well. So we had a meeting between Regional Council, District Council and the Cape Coast residents around flooding, stormwater, Tiawonga, car park erosion. What else, Elwyn?
I think it's it'll do.
It'll do?
Yeah.
So, yeah, and we had it was a good discussion. One thing that did come up, which is to do with the crest height, is that there could be, we're going to probably look at a variation to the consent that we have in place for raising the crest with shingle, and the consent currently says that for every metre we move, we have to import a metre, which seems a bit crazy at these times. So particularly with carbon, etc., and the availability of shingle and the cost of it. So there could be a possibility of varying the consent to say that we can move it from one place to the other on the beach, or if the river mouth's open, the shingle from that would go onto the crest. And just on with the crest one, it is quite important to get on with that, because the crest was remediated to a point in front of Hamoana, but not round the domain area at all, because they ran out of shingle. So those two things will go hand in fist, I think. And I was interested in just a comment on the agenda about the Maratotra revetment. I don't know much about that. Do you know anything about that, Mark? No. There are discussions with the community about building a wall across the Tiawonga car park to stop the sea basically going into the lagoon, the road, the houses. So that's an ongoing conversation.
Oh, that's the one I think that's referring
That's
to in
the
the
one
paper.
you're
That's
referring
the
to, but
ongoing
there's also
conversation.
a revetment further
So,
for the river.
and I think out of that meeting with the council, at the two councils the other day, that Graham Hanson from the Hastings District Council has got some further work to do with that group, just to see where those ideas get to.
Yep, so there are a number of issues at the coast there, and they'll put on the table at that meeting. And as a result, we have to get a plan and a time frame for addressing them. Mm-hmm. So Anne and Mark have outlined what the issues were, but there's no follow-up yet.
So a question from...
And some of it is coastal, and some of it is
So much
stormwater drainage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of it's the river, I think. No, they're all intermingled. It's not just one solution fits everything. Mm. And that was the real benefit of having the two councils and the community at the meeting.
Cool. So my question is, how does that work? So that sounds like it's being led by HBRC and HDC together. Is that right, that community meeting?
Yeah.
And how does that fit in with this committee and the work that we're doing? Is it...
Well, until Hastings District has to carry on with its obligations until the coastal hazard strategy is adopted and administered by HBRC. So that's what it is. We have to get on and do our job.
So you remember at the last meeting, there was a report tabled around interim management of the coastline, while the long-term strategy is, first of all, it goes through its process and get sign-off, but also the implementation program, which won't all happen in the first year, of course, is scheduled out, so we know what the time frame is. So there's things have to go on in the meantime. Some of the things we're now dealing with are new that we didn't know last year, and that's a consequence of the cyclone. So those are exercised in everybody's minds at the moment, how to fit that into the overall program of recovery and building back better and more resilient. One of the principles in that interim management plan is that whatever happens through the interim period shouldn't compromise the long-term outcomes that have been described in the strategy that we're still working on today through this committee.
I think what it does is it emphasises the importance of making sure we keep to the timeframes that are outlined here and don't let them slip.
Yeah, it sounds like quite a elegant solution. Sounds like a holistic approach to water being where we don't want it from all of its sources. Sounds like it's quite community driven and the engagement's high, and just to sort of that question around fitting in with this, it sounds like you've got councillors and staff that are working on both projects anyway, so it feels like a nice elegant solution there. Okay, moving on.
Certainly looking for one.
There we go.
Not entirely sure we're
Well
there.
done. We're on the path.
Chair, there are some solutions on the table, they're just being worked through at the moment
Yep.
as well, so,
Brilliant.
yeah. Community-driven solutions as well.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Do we want to speak to Whirinaki?
Well, there's nothing really to add to Whirinaki. Obviously, the south end of North Shore Road was damaged, and that was remediated as part of the emergency works. The access track at the northern end, is at risk, but in the scheme of the recovery efforts we've got now, it's a fairly low priority because it's not really property at danger. A little bit of accessibility, but there are bigger issues on the table at present time.
And the Coastal Inundation Assessment Project update. Did you want to speak to that briefly, Simon, or take it as read?
There's nothing further really to note. There was take that one as read. We do owe you a report back once that workshop's been held, but at this stage it hasn't.
Yeah, I notice further down in the papers, there's a comment that preferably a presentation to all councils at once.
Yeah.
And if we can't do that, present to individual councils. At what point do we decide that we present to individual councils? Because this paper, I think the report was completed, I'm going to say 12 months ago, 11 months ago, and it's just dragging in terms of presenting it to councils.
Yeah, there was some further work done on that report in more recent times with new LiDAR data that was available, that was run through. Hasn't changed the recommendations as it turns out, but it was a good question to be asked. And so the consultants had gone back and done some more work. So that's more recent, but I believe it is in a state where there is a final report that, provided we can get the councillors in a room together, or failing that separately, to do that report.
So first of all, did the new information change the recommendation in the report?
No, it didn't in the end.
Pardon me?
No, it didn't.
It didn't?
I don't believe so, but it was still a good question to ask at the time, because we didn't know that would be the answer.
Okay.
So I go back to, at what point do we go to individual councils with it? And who presents it?
That would be the authors of the report would present it to all councils, wouldn't it?
Yeah, Tonkin and Taylor will presumably do most of the reporting, and I know that John O'Shaughnessy, who's leading this project on behalf of the councils, is working on this actively and trying to arrange something, and has been in contact with the consultants, the key people, and the peer reviewer in recent times.
Can I suggest we cover that off, the action, when we get to the actions list? Okay, and the final sort of chapter of this paper is the Hawke's Bay Climate Action Joint Committee.
Or either yourself as one of the chairs, or I see Pippa's at the back. May I want to have a comment on that, either or?
I'm happy to give a quick update. So we've had 2 meetings so far, and at our second meeting we did a workshop around what we need to do to sort of form as a group and get ourselves in the best position to take this work forward for climate change. It's quite evident that there are a lot of different views around the table around what the priorities are, how we should go about things. And when you start getting into the detail, that makes it tricky. So we're going to have a whakawhanaungatanga session and set our key goals and some principles and values around how we want to work together as a committee. So it's sort of that go slow to go fast. We'll get together, we'll have a really good idea about where we're going and how we want to get there, and then the next bit should fall into place pretty quickly. So that whakawhanaungatanga session will be in August, and we'll have another meeting in December where we expect to present the work from that to the public.
Next August.
Oh, just October, sorry. In a couple of weeks, 3 weeks away. Right. That covers off the information in the paper. Is there any further questions? Okay, I'll look for a mover and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Redstone, and seconded by Councillor Van Beek. Anyone want to speak to the paper? All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Okay, our second paper is the project manager's update. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. So as usual, we have the project dashboard indicating the status of different work streams. There's no changes for this period to report. Essentially, the key risk, as mentioned by Elwyn, is the timeline. We are still targeting August next year. That's not under threat at this stage, but acknowledging it's a further delay to what we had planned to do. So I'm keen to keep that as a red key risk, acknowledging the timeframes are taken to get to this point. Otherwise, nothing of substance to note in the dashboard other than the fact that the funding model remains our key project to complete to get the strategy across the line. That is planned for our next meeting of this committee, as we're going to have Philip Jones present to work us through an update on that work. So that remains our key task, and look forward to that at our next meeting. The rest of the paper, I've just noted a brief update on some central government activity. There's been quite a lot. And in fact, since I wrote this paper, on Monday, there's been a new announcement for a national policy statement on natural hazard decision making, just come out as a discussion document. That's proposed to really address planning decisions for new development to try and stop things being built in risky places, essentially. It is still an RMA change. It's not part of the new reform process. It's open for submissions at the moment. And in my paper, I've mentioned there's an inquiry that's been commenced by the Environment Committee, which is now in abeyance through the election period, but looking at climate adaptation, and a couple of reports I've linked, which have come out of MFE and one of their working groups. So there's a lot of activity from central government in this space at the moment. I know we all had expected the Climate Change Adaptation Act to emerge in this term. That was the plan. That will not emerge, obviously, in this parliamentary term. But this work is all part of gearing up for that pretty important piece of legislation to come out in the future. Since I wrote this paper also, and you'll see in your run sheet, MFE have agreed to come along to this meeting today. They'll join us online in workshop after our meeting to talk about all of these things, and I guess importantly how this committee can engage with them as central government works on a whole lot of policy work. I think this project, we were at the front of the pack for a long time. Others have caught up, but I think with our real focus now on things like funding models, who should pay for this work, how to consent it, I think we're back now at kind of the front end of things. So it'd be really useful to engage with the government on those quite tricky decisions and discussions we're having, and how we can inform and work with MFE as we move forward towards August next year. So that's my summary, Chair. Happy to go to any questions.
Do you have any questions from the committee? A question that you've posed in the paper is at point 15 there, potentially this joint committee to engage and submit on the government's process. I didn't quite catch the name. You said there was another one that was currently up for submission, an RM?
The National Policy Statement for Natural Hazard Decision Making.
Okay. And that's currently open for submission.
Yep,
at the moment.
that's right. I think mid-November submissions are called for. I can check the date. And then the other one, the inquiry, is more broad, and they're calling for submissions by the 1st of November.
So I'd like to have a conversation with the committee about our appetite to submit on those. Yeah, would anyone like to kick us off before I get my thoughts out there?
Thinking the same thing, Chair. I'm just wondering whether we should submit. We've certainly got the experience and the understanding to do so.
Is it Councillor Verbeek?
Go first, Simon.
I think you're just going to note two things. One is, as you're probably aware, our terms of reference were amended a couple of years ago to support this committee to do this sort of thing, to engage and advocate for this sort of work. So there's definitely mandate and scope to do that. The one thing I'm not clear on is whether the councils themselves will be, I'm sure they will be, preparing submissions individually. It might be a good question to ask to someone like Gavin or Mark on whether councils have started that work or not, but we wouldn't want to trip over ourselves. But there's certainly, I think, merit in considering a joined-up approach.
Yeah, so my question is similar, is A, what's the process? We as a joint committee and our tag, but also as councils will have a view on this, and no doubt Hawkesbury Council generally does put submissions in. And I would think that our staff, but hopefully we'll hear from the back soon, that they will actually work together with TAG, and there is a crossover anyway, that we actually joined in our approach when it comes to submission. I think it's very important, and also as joint committee members, it's important that we actually are well aware of what these reports are and what they contain, because it will affect how we will be thinking in the future.
Just thank you. But I suppose just before we kick into the staff's perspective on it, we've tabled it with our council, and there's definitely political appetite for us to be submitting on this, and that it would be good. Yeah, I think this committee, this is our purpose, and it would be good if we had that joined up approach. But let's hear what the staff have already got in train.
Thanks, Chair. Just on the political thing, yeah, I think there's probably two lenses here, at least. One is the political messaging that needs to go back to central government, and then certainly then there's the operational, technical implementability of some of these bits of national direction coming at us. But what I can say is across the regional councils and unitary authorities in New Zealand, 16 of them, there is definitely an appetite to join up and collectively put in submissions on all this suite of natural hazard related things. I understand Local Government New Zealand is also thinking like that too. So they have a wings over into the city and district councils of New Zealand as well. So for me, as a person who briefs Hawke's Bay Regional Council on whether or not we should be submitting, I would be advising that let's not look at the generalities and all the devil in detail weeds kind of things. What's the Hawke's Bay flavour? What's the Hawke's Bay story that we need to say or tell and share? Because none of these other sector groups are going to be telling that particular story. So for this committee, if you were inclined to make a submission, what is the story of this committee and our partner entities' story to say in our submissions? And it might be that twofold thing. One is political, and also one is an operational implementability kind of thing. Does this help? Do these national instrument proposals help our endeavours on the Clifton to Tangoio coastline, or does it just get in the way and make things more difficult? So the choice is there for you to choose to make a submission. We can advise you how detailed or how specific that might be. And for most of these proposals, there is, dare I say it, a luxury of time. We've got several weeks to make submissions, whereas for some of the things that we've had in the past with the rampaging government that we've had, we've only had a matter of days for some things.
Remember?
Pushing things through. So perhaps there is an opportunity for TAG to think about what that sweet spot of a submission might be for this committee and liaise through at least the chair, if not several others of you, on sort of sense checking the scope of that submission.
I'd be quite keen for us to not double up too much. So can we hear from the other individual councils if they already plan on doing individual submissions?
We intend to do a submission. If we can do one jointly, that would be far better from our perspective. Definitely not repeating ourselves, yes, right? Like, we should try and make it as narrow as possible.
Brilliant.
I also wonder if, rather than this being the space for it, maybe the Climate Action Joint Committee as well.
Yeah.
Us to consider having, if we're looking at joint submission through a committee.
It's good. So for the live stream, that if that wasn't picked up by the microphones, the recommendation from Heather Bosselman from Napier City Council was that we potentially look at a joint submission coming from the Climate Action Joint Committee, which includes all 5 partner councils and Mana Whenua.
So just in terms of Hastings, I don't believe that we've as a staff yet had a conversation with that other than to circulate a number of people in our organisation about getting together to postulate a submission. I think that what's been suggested is really sensible, and I think that we would want to participate in that. That would be a good way to go. Pooling our resources, having a united regional front. This is why we've done a number of submissions in the past, highly productive land development and other such matters. And once the councils, I think, have the joint committees submission, they can individually endorse that with or without reservations if they have any as individual council. That's kind of in the same way that we often support Local Government New Zealand submission, but drawing out any points where we might disagree.
Okay.
We have, as Gavin pointed out, luxury a bit of time to just polish that sort of approach.
Okay. Just open for discussion. Councillor Van Beek.
Yeah, I think brilliant, it's really good. But as a joint committee, we definitely, and with these specific reports, we've got specific line of thought on this, especially with a strategy already in place. So I believe that, that we definitely have to somehow through Simon and through the joint committee be able to workshop as councillors, maybe the work that TAG may do as a straw man, that we can actually work with that material. Definitely as a joint committee, I would like to put some emphasis onto it if we could.
Councillor Redstone.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Sheriff, basically because we've got a slightly different kaupapa. So I think we need to make sure that all our input is put in clearly to wherever, perhaps it is the Climate Action Group, maybe it is councils, but we need to make sure our words get in there.
Just thinking about where the Climate Action Joint Committee's at a governance level, that would be quite tricky for it to fit in there. And potentially our tag at this committee has got quite a good history and the knowledge and expertise to be able to answer some of these questions. Wondering if, I don't know the logistics of it, but whether the staff that are also on the climate action tag could come together and then maybe, don't know, would it come, does it need endorsement from a joint committee, or how would it?
Well,
Or could we do a joint submission from the 5 councils with the 5 logos at the bottom, but it's our tag combined with the climate action tag that pull it together?
through the chair, just a couple of thoughts from me. I think the Climate Action Committee, I like the idea of that being a full region plus tangata whenua that's got a really powerful mandate to submit up. I like that idea. I think also this committee has very specific experience at a project level that would be invaluable to put up as well.
Yeah.
So if possible, some way to involve both would be great. We do have TAG on Monday, somewhat usefully, and I know we've got members from both TAG groups in the meeting on Monday, so we can talk about it more then and confirm logistics. I think if there's a request for a workshop to work through a submission, that's achievable, I'm sure. So my suggestion would be to put the challenge to TAG to figure out a way to make the most effective submission possible from this region. Give us that task and we can report back to you on what we suggest. My one thought was, so I should know this, but our next joint committee meeting is at November the something, isn't it? November the 10th, thank you, which is after submissions close, so that's not helpful. When's the next climate action joint committee? Won't be till December.
Yeah.
What's it? Submissions close on the,
National crisis, so it may close on the 13th.
Correct,
Okay.
and the inquiry
other
though
one?
closed the 1st of November. So I think, through the chair, I think that's the best way, is put it to TAG, we're meeting on Monday, we'll look at our who's doing what, come up with a suggestion. It might be that we craft a submission by email in the first instance and circulate it that way. If we can find some workshop time with you all, we could try and lock that in too. But just let us look at diaries and calendars. Have you got a thought, Desiree? Is that a thoughtful look? No, okay. So leave it with us and we'll come back to you by email to confirm a way forward if you like.
Rightio. So,
When do submissions close?
1st of November for the inquiry, and then 13th of November for the discussion document on the national policy statement.
There's a lot of work to do here,
Oh, yeah.
and getting consensus may not happen within that time period, particularly about the financial implications of a submission. It's asking for practical, legal and financial aspects, and we're behind the 8 ball with the financial stuff, even for the coastal hazard strategy, let alone managed retreat.
So through the chair, a couple of thoughts. One is I think the national policy statement piece is a little bit easier, I think, and that's all about giving the whole government more effective powers to prevent development in our at-risk locations. That's been an issue in Hawke's Bay, so I think that'd be straightforward for, and may not even be this committee that does it, a submission on the challenges that have been faced locally, what would be useful. That, I think, is a box that could be dealt with. The inquiry, as I understand it, our submission, we could keep it reasonably high level. I believe would be invited to speak to the submission, is typically how that works, but I can check that. But I think it would be a case of us opening a door, and it may be that we don't need to cover off every single thing in finite detail, but with the history we have in this project, we have plenty of material that we could summarise and say, look, here are the things we've struggled with, here are the things that we're trying to solve, here are the tools that we think we need. I think there's plenty of material we could work on, but yeah, I agree, we're not going to have all of the answers, but certainly opening that door would be highly valuable, I think.
I agree with that, but we should have a position on each of those. I mean, the stake we put in the ground at the start is what we're anchored to, and if we put it in at the wrong place, it's not right.
I hear what you're saying, which I think just goes to the point that perhaps a workshop would be useful to check how we're drafting it with you. Worst case, so circulate something by email. Unfortunately, our committee schedule isn't aligned with the submissions period. Noting we have MFE joining us in workshop, this would be a good discussion to have with them too about, beyond just a fairly transactional submissions process, what other avenues might this committee have to engage with them in a more relationship basis on top of just a submissions? There's a few avenues we could explore there, I think.
Yeah,
Okay.
but it goes a step back from this committee. It's actually got to go back to the council as to whether they support what's written or not.
yeah, I think Simon's recommendation that TAG will work on how a submission can best be pulled together. And if we task TAG with that work, and then if you can send that out by email around a plan that you've come to, and we can go from there. That should hopefully answer your questions.
Good point. And Gavin might think that we've got plenty of time, but I'm pretty sure the last week of October will come really quick, and then we'll be floundering. You know, that's normally how it happens. That's
Yeah.
human nature. So, Simon, once again, don't be afraid to have virtual workshops.
Yeah.
And if we have problems diaring time, then maybe we may have to have a workshop at night. This is actually really important, especially for this joint committee.
And I think in the timeline through you, Madam Chair, I think we have to consider endorsement back to each of the councils, not
Yes.
just this body. And I think that adds a complexity to the timeframe, or an extension, so the work needs to be front-ended more quickly than I think we plan.
Yeah. Yeah, a bit, if we think through times. You'll do a bit of a timeline in the email update that you send out, Simon, around how you see that process coming through committees for comment.
I will, and we'll prioritise this at TAG on Monday, so we've got 2 hours together. I'm sure we'll come up with a plan in that time, and be in touch by email, perhaps early to mid next week with the proposal.
Brilliant. Alison, have you got that noted as an action? Yeah. Brilliant. Right, so that brings us to the close of this paper. Was there any other questions before I close it off? Okay, can I have a mover? The officer's recommendation is simply that we receive the report and note the info in the project manager's update. Thank you, Councillor Corbyn, for your move, and Councillor Van Beek for your second. All those, did you want to speak to the paper? No. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Right. Third paper we're up to is the follow-up actions update.
Thank you, Chair. I can run through these briefly. The first one was updates to the interim response plan that the Joint Committee requested. So that's been done and circulated through to TAG. If you would like a copy, we can email that to this committee as well, but it's a live document that will keep being updated, but that task has been completed. And likewise, the updates to the thresholds report, there was a request to make sure that it was explicit that to date, tangata whenua involvement had not been secured as part of those draft thresholds. That's also been done and circulated through to TAG. The comms and engagement plan, item 3, that's in, at least a summary of it, is in today's agenda and it's the next item, so that's been complete. The recent coastal events, there was a report given to the last joint committee about really a focus on the effects of Cyclone Gabrielle on the coast. The author of that report's been on leave, so we're waiting on his return and we can then get that report circulated, so that's a work in progress. The next one was the scan of different work around the region on adaptation, so that again is in today's paper and it's been completed. Item 6 around funding workshops, as mentioned earlier, that'll be the focus for our next meeting in November. Item 7, this is a request for an infographic on the website to better explain, I guess, the pedigree of the process to get to this point, so that it's better communicated that this has been a robust process. That's a work in progress with frank engagement and support. The coastal inundation workshop with Tonkin and Taylor has been discussed in this meeting already. That's a work in progress. The newsletter that was circulated a couple of weeks ago.
Can I just go back to the item 8 there?
Yes, Councillor
Yeah,
Corbyn.
which we deferred from previously.
Yes.
Yeah. So what is the plan there? Tonkin and Taylor haven't been able to get the councils together for a presentation.
Can I maybe ask, I mean, this is a project led by Hastings, more from the building consent side, as you know. I wonder, to staff, Heather or Mark, is there anything else to add to the discussion on that?
Yeah, can you come up for the microphones? I'm just, while they're coming up, wondering, does anyone know when our next regional collaboration day is? Because that could be a...
13 November.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
So the question is, how much time would this workshop require on, and is that worth submitting to the leaders to see whether it can be included on the 13th?
Sorry.
Could we turn the volume up a little bit, as part of the back here, having trouble facing that way?
Okay. If we just bring our microphones closer when we're speaking, that might, can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Might just be a microphone issue.
Yes, so this was primarily a project designed to inform building consents, and basically it's delayed because everyone's been really busy post-cyclone. So I have now, Emily Frost and I have met with Tonkin and Taylor to discuss the report, and the intention, the next step is to set up a joint meeting with staff at all three councils. HBRC are also involved, and then after that meeting, the intention is to set up a joint workshop with councillors. But given time restraints, it's unlikely for that joint meeting between staff to take place until November, probably later in November. So we can, once we've got that date set up, we can set up a workshop between for councillors to come together. But I'm just still waiting to align those dates.
Okay. So it's still a work in progress. Are you happy with that?
Yeah. No,
You're really not, are you?
no, I'm not.
Be frank.
No, I'm not.
There's some
because
urgency around
I'd like
it
to have
for
a
you.
bit more certainty about it, but anyway, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So Chair, it won't reach the regional collaboration day?
Not if
It'll have
it's,
to be programmed for the following one?
yeah. Yeah, and just actually thinking, it's only HDC and NCC, isn't it? So it'd be kind of boring for Waiver and CHB. Maybe not boring, but less relevant. So it might be a three council kind of Whenua type situation. Okay. Do you want to continue on through?
Thank you,
We'll
Chair.
take them as read. Where are we up to?
I've just got two more to do. So 10 and 11. 10 was around, this is quite a long-standing one, and perhaps we can strike it off unless you'd like it to remain. But essentially what Joint Committee asked was, could TAG look at how this task has been looked at around the world, particularly interested in managed retreat processes. I mean, I would just note there's a lot of work out there. In fact, I went to a seminar last week with someone from the US presenting. I think they were in Hastings on Monday, actually, about how retreats done in the States. And the same old message I keep hearing on all these examples is that the central government equation is really important when it comes to things like buyouts and retreat. That's the message I keep hearing, but certainly there's no, I guess, settled or sorted or silver bullet solution out there for how to achieve retreat at scale, even looking internationally. So, look, it's an ongoing scan. We often do it. I'm not sure if you'd like to keep being informed on that item or remove it. I'll take your guidance on that.
I think it's quite interesting if you come up against someone having a real pearl of wisdom and you're in your scans, it'd be great for it to come maybe as your project manager's update, just a line item in there. But what does the rest of the committee think?
I'll go with Simon. I would remove it. It's something that is front of mind, I would imagine anyway, with anyone in TAG or Simon leading this project, that if something comes up, it will actually be brought forward.
So through the chair, perhaps then in my project manager's report, as I've done this time, where there's been a central government movement, I've noted it. I could have a standing sort of national, international scan or equivalent.
Yeah.
If I notice anything of interest, I'll let you know.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Any other thoughts? Okay.
So the last item, coastal ecology workstream. So just so you're aware, we have received the draft monitoring plan from the consultant engaged for this work. As you might recall, this is a long-standing workstream. It started off with a gap analysis to look at what do we know about coastal ecology values within our strategy area, identified a bunch of gaps. We've now received a monitoring plan which suggests a monitoring program to fill those gaps. It recommends a fairly extensive monitoring program, acknowledging there are fairly extensive gaps. But the idea there really is to make sure we have a good understanding of the values that are present. So when it comes to a consenting type process in future years, we're well equipped to make sure we are well placed to deal with those issues. The gap we retain on this is we're very keen that this monitoring plan is jointly developed with Tangata Whenua so that we can have a joined up monitoring process, a little bit like what the Port of Napier achieved We think it's a good model. So that's the piece that needs to be filled in before that plan can come back to this committee. But it is still good progress to have that plan, at least the first part, completed. So I'll call that work in progress. And that's the end of the actions, Chair.
Thank you. Any further questions or discussion? I'll call for a mover that we receive and note the follow-up actions update. Thank you, Councillor Van Beek and Councillor Dixon. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Right, on to our chunky bit, the Communications and Engagement Plan. Welcome back, Rebecca.
Perhaps to the Chair, just a couple of opening comments on this item. You'll be aware this has been long-standing. We've been trying to get this to you for quite some time, but given internal constraints, that was very slow in coming. So we're fortunate to have Frank Engagement supporting us, and Rebecca, who was formerly part of TAG in her past role, also very fortunate to have her back supporting us. Rebecca has a presentation to run through, which I'll hand over to her to take us through, and then we can take questions following that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rebecca.
Tēnā te mihi kia koutou, e whānau mai ahau ke whanganui ātara engārei kei Hiratunga ahau i hoana. E whānau, he kai tohu whakapā ahau kei Frank Engagement, ko Rebecca Ashcroft tōku ingoa. Kia ora. So, as noted in the paper, this is a strategic view of the communications and engagement strategy. So it's a simplified version of the plan that will be an operational living document. A lot of the thinking, the planning and the different perspectives have been gathered from TAG and have fed into this comprehensive plan. And the purpose of me presenting this to you today is to give you a bit of a feel of how much thinking went behind it, the tone, the messaging, the style that we're wanting to portray. So the strategy is being developed to support reconnecting with the community over the next year in the lead up to the formal strategy consultation, so guiding activities between now and July 2024. It takes into account the history of the project, how long it's been running, the complexity of it, the technical information, the community engagement, and it also takes into account the recent cyclone and the impacts of the community conversations that are happening around Managed Retreat and the impact that will have on the community's appetite to engage with us on this. So we have three objectives of this plan that bring together the mahi undertaken for the strategy on coastal hazards, the lessons learned from previous engagement to enable community participation, and a focus on tangata whenua engagement. By building the community's trust in the work that we've done to date and using engaging and understandable comms, we'll be able to get more people interested and buying into the process. Can you see that? Sorry, the font has changed for some reason. Ensuring we understand who's most impacted by coastal hazards and the measures we take to respond to them, what their motivations are and how we reach them is vital to ensuring the engagement campaign is targeted, resource efficient and ultimately successful in its aim of including a broad range of voices. To support this, a stakeholder analysis exercise was undertaken with TAG members who work closely with different sectors of the community in relation to coastal hazards. This builds upon the work already done to date to identify who's most impacted. This here is a very high-level list of who we've been engaging with, and the plan itself goes into a lot more comprehensive detail. As it's an operational plan that drills down into the detail, it talks about the approach, time and resource involved in engaging them, and it will change as we progress.
It's good to see you've added ratepayers because it actually wasn't in the paper. So one question I had, so I'm off to.
Brilliant.
You're off the hook.
Tick, one time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
I've just got a question, Rebecca.
Yeah.
Is the likes of Unison on the list?
Lifelines are on the list. Yes. Yeah.
Cool.
We're suggesting using, bringing in a bit of a catch cry and to use it throughout the campaign to build engagement and set a clear path of engagement. Apologies. So it's split into three parts there, but it's place specific. It talks to the impacted people and it shows action being taken. This will be used across all of our collateral on social media and videos, media releases, that kind of thing. to acknowledge the complexity of the strategy and the length of time the work has been going on for, we've really tried to refine these key messages in a way that is engaging and tells the story while making it understandable. So these are key to communicating consistently and in a way that people can engage with and understand, and they'll shape our collateral, support our media approach, and guide all outputs of the plan. So we've bucketed them into 3. So the first one's why. Why are we here? Why are we doing this? What are the coastal risks? What does this mean for our community? Then how? How have we got here? How have we made a plan? What does the plan cover? Who did we work with to build the plan? And then what? What do we do now? What do we need from the community? How do we turn this plan into action? How do we build resilience now so we have more options in the future? The key messages are in the plan, so I won't run through all of them, but welcome for feedback. We're suggesting breaking the campaign into 2 parts ahead of formal consultations. The first is ongoing engagement that will go from now until consultation, and then a dedicated pre-engagement period. So the ongoing comms will be around getting the standard comms in terms of newsletters, media releases, council videos, kind of reassuring the community we're still here and we're still working. The dedicated pre-engagement period is to test the consultation ideas ahead of the formal process, using our standard engagement techniques, but also throwing in some innovative techniques, and I'll go into that in a second. So these are the comms tactics that we generally use as a council, so videos, using council channels as well as partner channels, and advertising and media. You'll see on the right I've got when we'll be using them. So not all of it will be throughout the entire year. So particular advertising, because that will be paid, that will be for the specific pre-engagement period. Then we've got engagement tactics. So this is what we're recommending, where we get to the heart of engaging people that are impacted by coastal hazards, and this is a thorough list of options to engage with the community. So we're talking about champions. We've already got them in the community. They are connected into their community, they're spokespeople, and they're a great way of building community understanding and participation. Events, this is where I had a bit of fun with the plan actually, so this is when we were getting a bit innovative. So coastal walks and talks, so that could be with a Mātauranga Māori perspective, it could be biodiversity, it could be engineering. And then pedal to porch is a fun idea where you hop on a bike, a group of people hop on a bike, and you go to different parts, maybe just different people's houses, and they can talk about what their experience of living in that community is like, how their house has been impacted, or if they're a surfer, what they've noticed along the coast, or just to get that real personal view and make it more impactful. Community event pop-ups, so this is going to where the community are. This is going to Saturday sports days at the sports park and giving people a coffee voucher when they talk to you and get them away 5 minutes from their kids watching soccer or something. School presentations, so that's going along to the primary schools along the coast and talking to them, because essentially kids, mokopuna tamariki, they will be the ones who in the long term will be seeing the results of the strategy. A container, this idea was brought to the Joint Committee a couple of years ago when we were talking about pre-engagement, and it's utilising the Hastings District Council engagement container. So it's a shipping container, and what we would do is kit it out with information, and we would pop it in a few places along the coast. So maybe it would go down at Homoana, Marine Parade, and West Shore, and sometimes it could be there could be people there to answer questions, but most of the time it wouldn't be. So it would be for people to go through, read at their own time, and find out more information about the strategy. Then a survey, so this would be, again in the pre-engagement periods, this would be testing the ideas ahead of consultation. So that would be refined as we come closer to that period. We, all of us storytelling. So the idea of this is probably similar to pedal to porch, where it's helping people identify how this will impact them and seeing themselves and the people who are impacted as well to get them more involved. So I could live on the coast but my family live inland, but they'll be still impacted by the cost of rates or be impacted because they use the coast for walks. And then we could include council voices in there saying this is the work that we have done. The mahi we've undertaken over the last 8 years has been incredible and we're working so hard with the community. So to get quite a broad perspective of storytelling. Then citizen science. This is what Simon is proposing with CoastSnap. He talked about it at the last joint committee meeting, and that just seems like a really good way to engage people through citizen science. Then we've suggested some additional engagement tactics. So this would step us up to the next level of innovative engagement, but they are time and resources intensive, which is why they're additional or nice to have. So including them in the plan would be dependent on time and resource constraints. So community panel discussions, coastal walks and talks, depending on how many we want. Pecha Kucha, have you heard of Pecha Kucha? Yes. I thought that would be a cool one, whether we go along to the existing Pecha Kucha community events, or if we have our own coastal hazards Pecha Kucha. Green drinks presentation organised through Sustainable Hawke's Bay, as there's already a community that go there. Speed data bureaucrat. I thought this was quite fun. The technical advisory group aren't hot on it, but essentially you'll come along and you'd have 5 minutes with a bureaucrat to ask them whatever questions you want to do about coastal hazards. But who knows, dates might come out of it. Anyway. And then school presentations, apologies, that's a double up there. Art. I always think art is a really good way to engage the community because it gets their creative juices flowing and builds their buy-in. So whether it is a mural somewhere along the coast or whether it's wood printing sessions where you're getting the parents to come in with the kids. So when the kids are getting creative and having fun, the parents are also talking about their vision for the coast. And gamification. So this is using games to explain very complex topics. So there's an example that I've seen that Niwa have developed, and that is for stop banks, and it's like you roll the dice. You've got $700,000, there could be a big flood, there might not be, but you have to do upgrades to your house, and it's like, these are decisions you make, these are the implications. It's quite interesting. Right, that's me. What do you think?
Yeah, Councillor Dixon.
Yeah,
open for questions.
thanks, Chair. Another idea would be a speech competition amongst the secondary schools and the primary schools. You set the topic and they have to present their speeches too.
Oh, yeah.
Because that gets all the parents involved as well.
Of course.
Yeah. Then, have a bit of a carrot at the end of it. Then they can all be videoed and shared.
Yeah.
Through the eyes of kids.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Any questions? Do you have one?
No, I was just going to say, schools is a great way to get through, but the engagement with the local tangata whenua who've got their own stories to tell, and the storytelling is great. They'll have their own solutions that go with it, so the engagement with them is find these people and find their artists, because they've got great artists out there who can really display and tell the stories, so they can move alongside or engage beside you, walk beside you to do these things. I think including having them, their inclusion and their input would be very valuable to this.
Apologies, I meant to say earlier, we have tangata whenua in our list, but we will be working closely with our Mātauranga Māori work stream to figure out how we're engaging with tangata whenua, what that looks like, and making sure that input.
A few groups out there.
Yes. Yeah, yes.
Yeah, so
a lot.
They're pretty particular which ones you engage with.
Yes. Yeah.
I really like the gamification. In my head, I jumped straight to an escape room. Any further discussion or questions for Rebecca?
Very comprehensive. Well done.
Yeah. Oh, would you like to move it, Councillor Dixon?
Absolutely. Thank you.
And seconded by Councillor Redstone. Second. Oh, because you're from the same council. Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Would you like, you've already talked, would you like to talk to the paper anymore? No? Okay. We'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you very much, Rebecca. That's exciting.
It's probably worth noting, Chair, that we lost quorum for about 10 minutes. But we needed everything from each part of the council as well as the, yeah, so, yeah, I've noted that we can probably just carry on.
Yeah, okay. On just a side note that we've lost quorum because we don't have a member from every council now. So, HBRC, step up. Okay, our final paper is the Hawke's Bay Climate Change Adaptation Initiative Stocktake. And this was a really interesting read. And I'm interested to hear where the discussion goes on that. Would you like to kick us off with a quick summary, Simon?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, happy to. So this was born from our conversation, if you recall, last meeting about the fact that tsunami was sitting in our terms of reference, but we hadn't dealt with it for quite some time. And in fact, the Joint Committee had made a call some years ago to, whilst they had overseen some work to map that risk, really to hand it over to the civil defence response as opposed to more of a strategic plan that we're developing at the moment. However, it sat there in terms of reference, and it was asked recently whether or not it should be removed or retained or changed or not. And as part of that conversation, it was noted that a piece of work TAG were looking at was to do the scan of different climate change adaptation projects across council to see what was happening at a high level, where things could be better coordinated, and what the space was looking like. So what you have in this paper is, I'd say, the first outcome of this. I'll just note it turned out to be quite a tricky job, right? Because adaptation happens across a huge amount of council work already, right down to individual asset management plans, through to RM plans and the rest of it. So I have narrowed it or tried to keep it kind of coastal focused. So it is preliminary and high level, but even so, it does show that there is a lot of work happening right now, and that the work of this committee sits alongside the work of a number of others. So in the attachment, I've sort of grouped them based on initially the governance entity, and there are 4 primary ones that I've noted. There may be others. No, I've got 5. All of which are busy working in this adaptation space with a bit of a coastal focus. I won't run through all of those. I'll leave you to read through them if you haven't already. But I've also noted below that table a range of other discrete projects that are also going on alongside or outside of those governance structures to give a bit of a flavour of the types of things that are happening out there. So it's really just to note that this strategy is sitting inside a much broader work program. We know that our long-term plan was to create, through the strategy, a bit of a model to roll out to other parts of the coast, but take us a lot longer to get this plan through than we had thought. I suppose this is a lot broader than the very simple question of whether tsunami should be in or out, but it provides more of a landscape of the things that are happening out there. Perhaps the last thing just to note, as you're aware, our plan through this committee is that once the strategy is put out through HBRC's long-term amendment process in August next year, the intent is this committee's functions will change once HBRC adopts the strategy and becomes part of its BAU. This committee will get reformed as advisory function. So at some point worth discussing how that best fits in amongst this much broader landscape of other activities. But that's kind of the summary. Chair, happy to help with questions or hand over for discussion.
Do we have any questions first up? No. Happy to open for discussion then.
I have got a question which I hope is related, and it's, so the strategy is erosion and inundation. Yeah. So the Tonkin Taylor report that the councils are going to look at very soon talked about sea level rise and the sea going up the river mouths and then flooding over into communities. I can't see where the strategy actually does anything about that, about the river mouths, stop banks at the river mouth, and preventing that flooding over into communities during high sea or sea level rise. Well, it doesn't have to be a tsunami. It can be something more regular.
Big storms.
Yeah, thank you. Good question. So I've noted this in the paper as well. I think When we first set this joint committee up, there was a big debate about what hazards to include in scope for this version of the strategy. And we ended up settling on tsunami, coastal erosion, coastal inundation. But of course, lots of other hazards affect the coast. River flooding, as we know, is a big one. And also the compounding effects of river water coming down from the rivers, perhaps high tide, storm events, and the compounding effect of all that. Groundwater, liquefaction, there's a long list of things you could consider, and we'll need to at some point. We made a call earlier on that we would focus on what we knew good information about, which was those coastal erosion, coastal inundation, and sea level rise, and plan for that. And through future reviews, build in additional hazards and see how that might change our thinking. I guess it'd be a perverse outcome, right, to put in, say, some groins, spend a whole lot of money on nourishment, and that community gets wiped out by a river flood. So we have to work out how we approach this compounding multi-hazard environment at the coast. I would say that we'll always get new information on those hazards in scope now and other hazards, and over time we'll need to build those through. The last thing I'd note is quite how we deal with multi-hazards is emerging practice. The tool we're using now, this dynamic adaptive pathways approach, is not great, in my view, at multi-hazards, at dealing with multiple compounding effects. And it's emerging at the moment on how local government and central government can deal with that. So it's just to say, in a very long-winded way, you're correct that we haven't got all hazards in scope. We're not dealing with the effects of freshwater or groundwater, but we'll need to through future revisions of this work, just to make sure that decisions we make about spending money on making communities more resilient is effective overall and not just dealing with one problem and not another set. So it's possible that I haven't answered your question in my ramble, but did I get to a useful endpoint with that or not?
I missed that last bit, sorry.
Did I answer your question?
Well, I'm just wondering what is being done about it and when it'll be done. I think now's an opportune time if regional council is looking at its river management, stop banks, etc., and it needs to be integrated.
It does. Yeah.
There, because it's the interface. And, we can't just operate in a silo. So I'm just wondering what discussion has been had with regional council about that particular report and the information that was in there. I think there was something for I don't want to say a number, but it was hundreds of houses were going to get flooded from inundation from the sea coming up the river mouth. If the river was slightly high, if the sea level rose, etc., etc. There's got to be, I think it's a piece that's missing out of the strategy. And if it needs to be integrated with someone else, what are we doing about it?
So through the chair, I agree to an extent in the sense that the strategy isn't dealing with river flooding specifically, and that's been dealt with through HBRC and its other functions, right? And that's this list of things captures that river flooding work through what is currently the Cyclone Recovery Committee, but used to be Integrated Catchments Committee. There's a whole package of work on river flooding that has been done separately to this work. So you're correct in that sense. And we need to, over time, weave in more hazards and more information on existing hazards. But remember that the whole intent with this work is that it is adaptive, right? So we'll be setting signals, triggers, thresholds. So we'll be making decisions to change approach based on real life information as it happens. So we're not locked into one particular response. And we'll always be getting more information as time goes through. So I think there's this risk, right, that we try and achieve too much with this first iteration. We try and shoehorn too many things in. For now, I think we're pretty close to getting a strategy out that has a good consideration of the coast side issues of erosion and inundation. River flooding is being dealt with separately, I agree with that, but they shouldn't hold us up, I don't think, because they both still fit together reasonably well, and through defining good triggers and thresholds, we can deal with that uncertainty over time. It is really critical, and I'll just repeat that through future reviews, we continually review what new information we have on all types of hazards and adapt accordingly. But we'll never have all the information.
And can I just clarify that the resource consent process for when we're going to be implementing any solutions would ensure that we don't have that, you gave it a good name, like a perverse effect on river flooding. So any solutions in this strategy, we will take into account inundation and river flooding at that point and as that information comes to light?
Just trying to think from a consenting process what effect the proposals might have on river flooding, and I can't think of any.
Okay.
I think more the point is, are we building up resilience at the coast but still getting flooded in behind?
Yep.
And so it's that combination of hazards which are being looked at separately and will be under one mantle moving forward through HBRC, so it is coming together. But I would say it's fair to say, at least in my view, happy to be corrected, that it's not fully integrated at the moment. But it is certainly a future state we're aiming towards.
So at this point, it's very low risk that anything we do could make river flooding worse. But what we've done at the moment is focus in on one hazard to get our organisational structure and get our plans and our processes and the funding models and everything in place. And as we progress forward with the committee in this work, it was always the intention to include more hazards as we gained momentum and knowledge and expertise.
It's a good summary with one caveat. I would say, in my view, the only risk that this strategy could cause to make things worse from a river flooding point of view is if we inadvertently encourage development in coastal areas because we gave the view it was suddenly more safe.
Okay.
And therefore you should build, you should subdivide, create more things, more assets, and therefore put more assets in at-risk locations. So that is something we are very mindful of, and through the regulatory work stream, this called this moral hazard risk, right? So we've got discussions on that. In fact, this new NPS I mentioned in my earlier paper is actually one of the missing tools in my view the whole government doesn't have really strong powers to avoid development in risky areas, and this NPS is attempting to address that.
Brilliant. So that's covered off there. Good.
In development, yeah.
Potentially, yeah. Is there any more conversation? Councillor Simpson.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. I think it's about causation, and I think what we have to look at is how do we mark success. So therefore, it is important that early, if we're still early, in the process of saying, well, what is the causation that we are trying to protect against? And so in this case, it's about the coastal risks, sea level rise. Some inundation may come in through the river mouth and then behind. If it's caused by the sea level rise or coastal storm events or whatever it is, then surely it's in remit. But if it's rainfall landing on the land elsewhere causing flooding in the coastal environments, is that not part of the Regional Council's asset management program as opposed to this committee's piece of work? And so therefore I think purpose is defined by causation, and that's how we then identify the work that this committee's focused on, which is the coastal protection mechanisms. I think that's as simple as you can make it. And I think that's the key thing, is to keep it simple, because otherwise we'll just keep adding things in, but just keep prolonging the purpose for this committee. And ultimately in our role, the purpose should be that committees serve their purpose and then cease to exist. Mm-hmm. So if we keep extending it, we have to have good cause for doing that. And I think therefore we should be very clear that the purpose of this committee is about the causation of the sea level rise and coastal erosion caused by the action of the sea, rather than go to extreme events such as tsunami and other things like that. Mm-hmm. But we should really be, as I say, our purpose should be defined by causation, which is the action of the ocean. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So,
or routine action of the ocean, should we put it that way? Yeah.
There was a good summary, and I think if we look at paragraph 9, the officer's recommendation around potential wording for a terms of reference minor change, I think that summarises quite neatly what you've just said there. And it's that sort of, it's the two parts. It's clearly defining our scope and giving us the space to learn to walk before we can run. Right. Was there any other further conversation that we wanted to have? I think from my perspective, it'll be really interesting to see how the Climate Action Joint Committee develops and where this sits within that work, because the remit of the Climate Action Joint Committee is both mitigation and adaptation at a regional scale. And what we have here is a subset of that. So not at a regional scale, just part of Hastings and Napier, and it's one part of mitigation, so it's one part of adaptation, so it's just looking at the coast. So this work does fit in as a subset of that committee, and it'll be interesting to keep that in the back of our minds as we head into August 24 when this work gets vested within HBRC, whether this advisory board is appropriate or whether that work gets vested with the Climate Action Joint Committee. But I think that's not a decision that we need to make today, that's just a potential direction that we may head in. And it may be that it's perfectly legit that this carries on. We don't know. Okay, if there's no further discussion on the paper, I'll call for a mover. Oh, one from Simon.
Sorry, Chair, can I just clarify, would you like me to make that change to the terms of reference? It's an appendix change, but it might just have some useful clarification at paragraph 9.
Given that we don't have quorum today, can you bring that back to us in a paper at the next committee meeting, a terms of reference change?
Sure, and I'll bring the terms of reference with track changes as well, so it's clear.
Perfect, yes, that would be good. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Redstone. Moved by Councillor Redstone, seconded by Councillor Simpson. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you very much. And that concludes the final paper of our committee meeting today. I have been thinking that I was very remiss and we didn't open with a karakia. But if we would like to close with a karakia, Evelyn, would you like to lead us in a karakia to close?
Sure. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa. Te ātawhai o tō tātou ariki o i Greiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhina tahitanga ki te wairua tapu. Ake, amina.
And thank you very much. And we'll exit off live stream now.